The laughter in courtroom 402 wasn't nervous. It was cruel. Richard Montgomery didn't just want a divorce. He wanted a demolition. He stood there, adjusting his $3,000 bespoke silk tie, and pointed a manicured finger at his wife, Sarah, huddled in a coat 2 sizes too big. She can't even afford to pay attention, Your Honor, let alone pay legal fees, he sneered, looking back at his new fiancée, Vanessa, who stifled a giggle. The gavel banged, sealing the judgment that left Sarah with nothing but the clothes on her back. But Richard should have checked the clock, because precisely 3 minutes later, a man in a charcoal suit would walk through those double doors and change the definition of net worth forever. Richard thought he won the lottery by leaving her. He had no idea he just walked away from the bank itself. The fluorescent lights of the Manhattan Superior Court hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to burrow specifically into Sarah Jensen's skull. She sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. Her knuckles were white, the skin rough from months of scrubbing floors at the diner, where she picked up shifts just to pay for the motel room she was currently living in. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was entirely different. It smelled of sandalwood cologne and arrogance. Richard Montgomery, the man she had loved for 6 years, the man she had supported while he finished his MBA and climbed the corporate ladder at Stratton Oakmont Financial, was currently whispering something into the ear of his attorney, Harrison Blackwood. Blackwood was a shark in a pinstripe suit, a man known for tearing spouses apart for sport. They both chuckled. "Mr. Montgomery," Judge Harriet Moore said, her voice weary. She adjusted her glasses, looking down at the file. "We are here to finalize the dissolution of marriage and the division of assets. Although, looking at the financial affidavits, the word assets seems to be doing a lot of heavy lifting on one side." Richard stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked every inch the rising star of Wall Street, tall, blonde, with a jawline that looked carved from marble. He flashed a charming, practiced smile at the judge. "Your Honor, if I may," Richard said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I've tried to be generous. I really have. But Sarah, well, Sarah has never really understood the value of money. She brings nothing to the table. She came into this marriage with debt, and she's leaving with, well, let's just call it freedom to find someone more on her level." Sarah flinched. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. It was the same tone he used when he told her she embarrassed him at company dinners because she didn't know which fork to use for the salad. The same tone he used when he explained why he couldn't take her to the Hamptons because she didn't have the wardrobe for it. "Objection," squeaked Elias Finch. Sarah's lawyer was a stark contrast to Blackwood. Elias was 72, wore a cardigan under his jacket, and operated out of a small office above a bakery in Queens. He was working pro bono because he had known Sarah's mother, briefly, decades ago. "On what grounds, Mr. Finch?" Judge Moore asked, rubbing her temples. "Relevance, Your Honor," Elias said, shuffling his papers. "Mr. Montgomery's personal opinion of my client's social standing is not relevant to the equitable distribution of marital property." Harrison Blackwood stood up, not even bothering to look at Elias. "Your Honor, it is entirely relevant. We are arguing that Mrs. Montgomery, Miss Jensen is not entitled to alimony because she contributed nothing to the accumulation of wealth. Richard made the money. Richard bought the penthouse. Richard paid the bills. Sarah existed." "I cooked," Sarah whispered. It was the first time she had spoken in an hour. Her voice was raspy. "I cleaned. I ironed your shirts, Rick. I proofread your thesis." Richard turned to her, his eyes cold and dead. "And I appreciate the domestic help, Sarah, but let's be real. I could have hired a maid for a fraction of what you cost me in social capital. You're a liability, Sarah. You always have been. You're poor in spirit, poor in mind, and let's face it, poor in reality." He laughed then, a short, sharp bark of amusement. "She's here wearing a coat from a thrift store, Your Honor, asking for half of my bonus. It's laughable. She wouldn't know what to do with that kind of money. She'd probably spend it on, what? Cat food and lottery tickets?" In the back row of the gallery, a woman with perfectly blown-out brunette hair covered her mouth to hide a smile. Vanessa, the woman Richard had been working late with for the past 8 months. She wore a diamond on her finger that cost more than Sarah's entire childhood home. Sarah felt the tears prickling, but she refused to let them fall. She remembered what her father had told her, years ago, before he vanished into the ether of the medical system and hospice care. Dignity, Sarah. It's the one thing they can't tax, and they can't steal. You hold on to it. Mr. Montgomery, Judge Moore said sharply, refrain from insults. The court is aware of the financial disparity. It's not just financial, Your Honor, Richard pressed, sensing victory. It's a lifestyle incompatibility. I am moving forward. I am becoming a partner at the firm. I need a partner who fits that life. Sarah is. She's a sweet girl, really, but she's a peasant trying to live in a palace. I'm doing her a favor, setting her free to go back to wherever people like her belong. People like me? Sarah stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Elias put a hand on her arm. Sarah, sit down. No, Sarah said, her voice shaking but gaining volume. You mocked me for 3 years, Rick. You made me feel small, so you could feel big. You think because your father owns a dealership in New Jersey that you're American royalty. Richard smirked. And who was your father, Sarah? A mechanic? A drifter? You never even talked about him. Probably too ashamed. My father, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the room, taught me that the loudest man in the room is usually the weakest. Richard rolled his eyes. Touching. Can we wrap this up, Your Honor? I have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin at 1, and I'd hate to keep Vanessa waiting. The judge sighed. She looked at Sarah with pity, a look Sarah hated more than Richard's scorn. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff regarding the prenuptial agreement, which I find to be valid. Ms. Jensen, you are awarded the 2018 Honda Civic and a lump sum payment of $5,000. You are to vacate the premises by midnight tonight. No alimony is awarded. Harrison Blackwood high-fived Richard. It was a disgusting display of unprofessionalism, but they didn't care. They had won. They had crushed the gold digger, who wasn't even good at digging. Richard leaned over the table toward Sarah. $5,000. Don't spend it all in one place, sweetie. Maybe buy yourself a clue. Sarah sat back down, numb. It was over. She was homeless, divorced, and humiliated. Court is adjourned. Judge Moore banged the gavel. But as the sound of the gavel faded, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom groaned open. The man who entered didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like he owned the lawyers. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with silver hair swept back impeccably. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that whispered of Savile Row, tailoring the kind where the fabric absorbs light rather than reflecting it. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than the United States Constitution, battered, but clearly precious. Behind him walked 2 younger associates, both carrying thick, bound documents, and a heavy-set security guard who took up a position by the door, locking it from the inside. Excuse me, Judge Moore said, halfway out of her chair. This session is closed. Who are you? Richard, who was busy putting his arm around Vanessa, who had just rushed the railing to congratulate him, turned to look at the intruder with annoyance. Yeah, buddy, show's over. The poor girl lost. Go beg somewhere else. The man in the charcoal suit ignored Richard entirely. He walked straight to the center of the room, past the bar, and stopped in front of the judge. He placed the leather briefcase on the plaintiff's table, right on top of Richard's paperwork. My name, the man said, his voice a deep baritone that commanded instant silence, is Arthur P. Sterling. I am the executor of the Sterling Trust, and I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor, but I was instructed to enter these chambers only after a judgment of divorce was finalized. Judge Moore frowned. Sterling? I don't know that firm. I am not with a firm, Your Honor. I am private counsel. He turned slowly, his gray eyes locking onto Sarah. He didn't smile, but his expression softened imperceptibly. Hello, Sarah. Sarah's breath hitched. She recognized him, not as a lawyer, but as the man who used to play chess with her father on Sundays, when she was a little girl. Uncle Arthur? She whispered. Richard let out a loud, mocking groan. Oh, great. The family reunion. Look, Gramps. She got her $5,000. Take her to Denny's and celebrate. We have places to be. Arthur Sterling turned to Richard. He looked at him the way a biologist looks at a particularly uninteresting slide of bacteria. Mr. Montgomery, you are currently employed as a junior vice president at Stratton Oakmont Financial, correct? Richard puffed out his chest. Senior vice president? As of next week, actually. I see. Arthur opened his briefcase. The click of the latches echoed like gunshots in the silent room. And you, Miss Vanessa Lewis, he said, not looking at her, but reading from a paper. Currently unemployed, living off an allowance provided by Mr. Montgomery, formerly an Instagram model. Vanessa bristled. Excuse me? Who do you think you are? And you, Arthur continued, turning to the judge. Your Honor, I have here a document that requires immediate reading. It is the last will and testament of one Jonathan Edward Jensen. Richard laughed. Jensen? Her dead dad? What did he leave her? His collection of rusty tools? A mountain of medical debt? Actually, Arthur said, sliding a thick document toward the judge, Mr. Jensen passed away 3 days ago. The timing of this divorce was unfortunate, or perhaps fortuitous, depending on where you stand. Sarah felt the room spin. Dad died? No. I just saw him last week. He was fine. He went peacefully in his sleep, Sarah, Arthur said gently, but he gave strict instructions. His will was to be executed only when you were free of encumbrances. Specifically, marital encumbrances. Arthur turned back to Richard. You see, Mr. Montgomery, you spent a great deal of time today mocking Sarah for being poor. You mocked her father for being a drifter. He was a nobody, Richard spat. A recluse. A recluse. Yes, Arthur agreed. Nobody? No. Jonathan Jensen was the silent founder of Prometheus Dynamics. The room went dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop. Richard blinked. Prometheus. Wait. The chip manufacturer? The defense contractor? The company that holds the patent for the semiconductors used in 80% of the world's smartphones and electric vehicles, Arthur corrected. Yes, Jonathan hated the limelight. He hated people like you, Mr. Montgomery, people who value the label on the bottle more than the wine inside. So, he stepped down from the public eye in 1998, placed his assets in a blind trust, and lived a simple life to raise his daughter away from the vultures. Arthur pulled a second document from his bag. The will stipulates that upon his death, the entirety of the Sterling Jensen estate transfers to his only living heir, Sarah Jensen. Richard's face went pale. He looked at his lawyer, Blackwood, who was suddenly sweating profusely. How much? Richard whispered. How much is the estate? Arthur adjusted his cuffs. He looked at Sarah, then back at Richard. A small, cold smile played on his lips. The liquid assets, cash, stocks, bonds, are valued at approximately $4.2 billion. The real estate portfolio, including an island in the Aegean and 12,000 acres in Montana, is valued at another $1.5 billion. But the controlling stake in Prometheus Dynamics, Arthur paused for effect, puts the total value of the inheritance at roughly $142 billion. Vanessa gasped audibly. Her hand dropped from Richard's arm as if he were suddenly radioactive. Richard's knees actually buckled. He grabbed the table for support. Bill? Billion? With a B? With a B, Arthur confirmed. However, there is a catch. Harrison Blackwood, sensing an opening, jumped in. A catch? Is the money in a trust? Is it conditional? The condition, Arthur said, holding up the divorce decree that Judge Moore had just signed, was that Sarah must be unmarried at the time of the transfer. Jonathan wanted to ensure that no gold-digging spouse, I believe that was your term, Mr. Montgomery, could get their hands on his life's work. He wanted to be sure that whoever was with Sarah was with her for her, not the money. Arthur Lee picked up the divorce papers. If you had stayed married to her for just 5 more minutes. Arthur checked his watch. You would have been entitled to half of the appreciation of those assets under marital property laws, roughly $70 billion. Richard looked at the clock, then at the divorce papers, then at Sarah. But, Arthur continued, since you were so eager to finalize this judgment, and since you were so adamant that Sarah takes nothing but her debts, well, the court has spoken. You are divorced. The estate passes to Sarah Jensen, sole and separate property. Sarah sat there, stunned. She didn't care about the money. She was still processing that her father was gone. But looking at Richard's face, a mixture of horror, greed, and nausea, she felt something spark inside her. It wasn't joy. It was justice. Wait, Richard stammered, stepping forward, his hands shaking. Wait, Your Honor. I wasn't in my right mind. The stress. I want to withdraw the divorce petition. Harrison Blackwood chimed in, desperate. Your Honor, clearly there has been a mistake. My client was under duress. We move to vacate the judgment. Judge Moore looked at Richard over her spectacles. She remembered his arrogance. She remembered his mockery. She remembered cat food and lottery tickets. She picked up her gavel. Mr. Montgomery, the judge said, her voice icy, you insisted on an expedited ruling. You mocked this court's time. You insulted the defendant. You got exactly what you asked for. But $70 billion, Richard screamed, his voice cracking. She tricked me. She knew. I didn't know, Sarah said softly. She stood up, and for the first time, she looked tall. She looked like the owner of Prometheus Dynamics. I didn't know about the money, but I knew about you, Rick. I knew you'd leave the second you thought you could do better. Richard lunged toward her, his eyes wild. Sarah, baby, listen. I didn't mean it. It was a game. You know how lawyers are. I love you. Vanessa means nothing to me. Vanessa slapped him. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. You miserable leech, she shrieked, grabbing her purse. I'm calling my Uber. Sarah. Richard ignored Vanessa, reaching for Sarah's hand. Please, we can work this out. We're a team. Arthur Sterling stepped between them. He didn't touch Richard, but his presence was like a brick wall. Mr. Montgomery, Arthur said, I believe the lady has a Honda Civic to catch, and you have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin. I suggest you hurry. I hear they charge a fee for no-shows. And considering you just lost the biggest lottery ticket in history, you might want to save your pennies. The walk from the courtroom to the parking garage was usually a lonely one for defendants who had just lost everything. But for Sarah, it felt like an extraction mission from a hostile war zone. Arthur Sterling moved with a speed that belied his age. He flanked Sarah on the left, while the heavy-set security guard, whose name, Sarah learned, was Barrett, cleared a path through the throng of people in the hallway. Don't stop walking, Arthur murmured, guiding her by the elbow. Don't look at them. Don't answer them. Answer who? Sarah asked, dazed. It's just people. But as they pushed through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse, the world exploded in flashes of white light. Miss Jensen, is it true you're worth more than Amazon? Sarah, over here. Did you hide the assets from your husband? Richard says you defrauded him. Any comment? Sarah shielded her eyes. How do they know? We just walked out of the room. Court records are public. But this. Arthur grimaced, shoving a microphone away from Sarah's face. This was a leak. Someone tipped them off, the second the gavel banged. Likely a clerk, looking for a payout. They reached the curb. Sarah expected to see her rusted 2018 Honda Civic. Instead, 3 black Cadillac Escalades were idling, their engines purring with a low, menacing rumble. Get in the middle one, Arthur commanded. Sarah. The scream came from behind them. It was Richard. He was running down the courthouse steps, his tie flapping over his shoulder, his face a mask of sweaty desperation. He looked like a man who had just watched his parachute fail to open. Sarah, wait! Richard shoveled his way through the paparazzi, who turned their cameras on him like a pack of hyenas spotting a wounded gazelle. Mr. Montgomery, did you really divorce the richest woman in New York for a yoga instructor? A reporter from TMZ shouted. She's not a yoga instructor, Richard yelled back. distracted. She's a... Get out of my way. He reached the escalade, just as Barrett was closing the door. Richard jammed his hand into the gap, wincing as the heavy metal pinched his fingers. Sarah, please, Richard panted, his eyes locking onto hers through the window. We need to talk. Without the lawyers. Just you and me. Like old times. Remember our trip to Cabo? Remember when we promised to be best friends forever? Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the sweat staining the collar of his expensive shirt. She saw the terror in his eyes. Not terror of losing her, but terror of being ordinary. I remember Cabo, Rick, Sarah said, her voice calm. I remember you made me pay for half the hotel room because you said it was empowering for me to contribute. I remember you flirting with the waitress while I had food poisoning. I was just being polite, Richard pleaded. Sarah, I love you. I made a mistake. A momentary lapse in judgment. The stress of the merger. It got to me. You aren't a partner yet, Rick, she said softly. And you never will be. Barrett shoved Richard back with one hand. The man stumbled, tripping over a cameraman's cable and sprawling onto the dirty sidewalk. Go, Arthur said to the driver. The convoy peeled away, leaving Richard Montgomery on his knees, surrounded by the flashing lights of 100 cameras, capturing the exact moment his life fell apart. Inside the Escalade, the silence was thick. Sarah slumped into the leather seat, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a crushing wave of grief. He's really gone, isn't he? She whispered. My dad. Arthur opened a small refrigerated compartment and handed her a bottle of water. He is, Sarah. I'm so sorry. He fought the cancer for 2 years. He didn't want you to know. He didn't want you to see him weak. And he didn't want Richard to know the clock was ticking. Why? Sarah asked, tears finally spilling over. Why all the secrets? Why the poverty? We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. He drove a truck. He fixed toasters for neighbors. Arthur sighed, looking out the tinted window as the Manhattan skyline blurred by. Jonathan was a genius, Sarah. A true, terrified genius. When he invented the Prometheus protocol in the late 90s, the algorithm that allows quantum computing to interface with biological systems, he realized 2 things. 1, it would change the world. And 2, it would make him a target. Arthur turned to her. He saw what money did to his friends. He saw what it did to families. He wanted you to grow up knowing the value of $1, yes. But more importantly, he wanted to protect you from the sharks. He wanted to know that when you eventually married, it would be for love. He tested Richard. Sarah frowned. Tested him? How? The job at Stratton Oakmont, Arthur revealed. Your father pulled strings to get Richard that interview. He wanted to see if Richard would use the opportunity to build a life with you, or if he would use it to outgrow you. He monitored Richard's emails, his spending, his extracurricular activities. Sarah felt sick. He knew about Vanessa? He knew about Vanessa before you knew about Vanessa, Arthur said grimly. He knew about the 3 others before her, too. Sarah gasped. 3? Richard is a narcissist, Sarah. He collects people who validate him. Your father was waiting for you to leave him. But you have your mother's loyalty. You stayed. So, Jonathan had to wait until Richard made the first move. The divorce filing was the trigger. If Richard had stayed married to you until the moment of Jonathan's death, the trust would have dissolved into charity. Richard would have gotten nothing, and you would have received a modest stipend. So, Sarah's mind raced. Dad bet on Richard divorcing me? He bet on Richard's greed, Arthur corrected, and he won. By divorcing you before the will was read, Richard legally severed his claim to the estate. It's the greatest short sell in history. The car phone buzzed. Arthur picked it up, listened for a moment, and smiled a sharp, predatory smile. Put him on speaker, Arthur said. Who is it? Sarah asked. Mr. Reginald Sterling, my brother, and the senior partner at Stratton Oakmont Financial. A voice crackled over the speakers, smooth and terrified. Arthur, is Sarah there? Please tell me she's there. She's here, Reginald, Arthur said. Miss Jensen, Reginald's voice was trembling. First, Let me offer my deepest condolences on the passing of your father, a giant, a titan of industry. We had no idea. Thank you, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Miss Jensen, I am calling to assure you that Stratton Oakmont values your family's privacy and, well, we would be honored, truly honored, to continue managing the minor portfolio your husband, I mean, your ex-husband, was handling. In fact, we'd like to upgrade you to our Obsidian tier. Zero fees. 24 zeven de concierge. Reginald, Arthur interrupted. Sarah is currently reviewing her options, but she did have a question about one of your employees. Anything. Name it. Richard Montgomery, Arthur said. What is his current status? There was a pause. Montgomery? Who? Oh, you mean the junior associate? He's, well, effectively immediately, he is no longer with the firm. Gross misconduct. Breach of ethics. We can't have people like that representing the Sterling brand. Sarah closed her eyes. An hour ago, Richard was a rising star. Now, he was a liability. Good to know, Arthur said. We'll be in touch. He hung up. Where are we going? Sarah asked, watching the city turn into the lush greenery of the Hudson Valley. Home, Arthur said. The real home. You need to prepare, Sarah. The divorce was just the opening act. Richard won't go quietly. He's going to sue. He's going to lie. And he's going to try to destroy you to get a settlement. You need to be ready to fight. I don't know how to fight, Sarah whispered. I'm a waitress. I scrub floors. Arthur looked at her, his eyes gleaming. You're a Jensen, Sarah. You don't scrub floors anymore. You buy the building and evict the dirt. The house was a fortress. Located in the hills of Cold Spring, looking down over the Hudson River, the Jensen estate was a sprawling compound of glass, steel, and stone that seemed to grow organically out of the cliffside. It had a helipad, a bunker, and enough security personnel to invade a small country. Sarah wandered through the halls, in a daze. The walls were lined with art she recognized from textbooks, a Monet here, a Rothko there. In the center of the living room, resting on a pedestal, was the chessboard her father used to play on. It was made of jade and obsidian. He sat here every night, Arthur said, walking in with a tablet, watching the markets, watching you. Why didn't he tell me? Sarah asked again, tracing the edge of a rook. We could have had this time together. He was protecting you from this. Arthur swiped the tablet and handed it to her. It was a news feed. Trending. The $1 trillion divorce. Hashtag. Team Sarah versus Team Rick. The internet had exploded. Richard's face was everywhere, but so was Sarah's. Photos of her walking into the diner in her uniform were being juxtaposed with photos of the estate. The headlines were vicious. Asterisk. Waitress dupes Wall Street hubby? Did she know all along? Asterisk. Richard Montgomery. The dumbest man in America? Asterisk. The secret life of Jonathan Jensen. How the poor mechanic built the internet. They are already spinning it, Arthur warned. Richard has hired PR Crisis Management, a firm called Black Dog. They specialize in victim blaming. They are going to paint you as the mastermind. They will claim you hid the will to trick Richard into a divorce so you wouldn't have to share the money. But that's insane, Sarah cried. He mocked me. He left me. Truth doesn't matter in the court of public opinion, Sarah. Narrative matters. And right now, Richard is playing the role of the duped husband. Arthur's phone rang again. He looked at the screen and frowned. Speak of the devil. It's Harrison Blackwood, Richard's lawyer. Arthur put it on speaker again. Arthur, Blackwood's voice was oily, oozing false confidence. I hope you and Miss Jensen are settling in. Lovely property. I hear the property taxes are a killer, though. What do you want, Harrison? Arthur snapped. We want to talk settlement, Arthur. Look, Richard is a reasonable man. He understands that legally, he stepped in a bear trap. But ethically, morally, he supported that woman for 6 years. He paid for her food, her clothes, her shelter. He bought her a coat from Goodwill, Harrison. We have the receipts. Details. Details. Blackwood waved it off. Here's the deal. Richard is prepared to file a suit claiming Fraud in the inducement. He's going to claim Sarah knew about the inheritance and deliberately withheld the information to sabotage the marriage contract. We have witnesses. You have Vanessa, Arthur scoffed, a woman who is currently selling her story to the Daily Mail for 10 grand. We have others, Blackwood said darkly. Look, we don't want a long court battle. It's bad for the stock price of Prometheus Dynamics. The markets are jittery. They don't like uncertainty. We are willing to walk away for a flat fee. Sarah leaned forward. How much? 5 billion, Blackwood said. Cash, tax-free, a drop in the bucket for her, but enough for Richard to rebuild his dignity. Arthur looked at Sarah. It was her decision. Sarah thought about the 5 billion. It was an unfathomable amount of money. She could pay him to go away. She could never see his face again. It would be easy. Then she remembered the courtroom. She's a peasant trying to live in a palace. Cat food and lottery tickets. Sarah took the phone from Arthur. Hello, Harrison, she said. Her voice was different now. The tremble was gone. It was replaced by the cold, hard steel of the Hudson River wind. Ah, Sarah, Blackwood purred. So good to hear your voice. I assume Arthur has explained the situation. 5 billion is very generous, considering. No, Sarah said. Excuse me? No, Sarah repeated. No settlement, no cash, no deal. Miss Jensen, Blackwood's voice hardened. If you refuse, we will drag this out for years. We will subpoena every text message you've ever sent. We will depose your friends, your coworkers, your second-grade teacher. We will make your life a living hell. We will freeze the assets. You can't freeze the assets, Harrison, Arthur interjected. The trust is irrevocable and domiciled in the Cayman Islands. You can sue until the sun burns out. You won't touch a dime of the principal. We'll see about that, Blackwood snarled. We'll see how she likes being the most hated woman in America, the Black Widow who stole her husband's future. Bring it on, Sarah said. And Harrison, tell Richard something for me. What? Tell him I'm enjoying the freedom he gave me. And tell him that the Honda Civic is parked on the street if he wants to sleep in it. That's the only asset he's ever getting from me. She hung up. Arthur looked at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. Your father would have loved that. I'm not done, Sarah said, standing up. I want to go to the company. I want to see Prometheus. I want to know what I actually own. Now? Arthur asked. It's 8 p.m. Now, Sarah said. If I'm going to be a CEO, I need to stop thinking like a waitress. The headquarters of Prometheus Dynamics, NPM. The building was a black monolith in the center of the financial district. It had no sign, just a stylized flame logo in the lobby. As Sarah walked in, security guards snapped to attention. They knew who she was. The memo had gone out. Arthur led her to the top floor, the 90th floor. The elevator opened into a room that looked more like a laboratory than an office. Walls of screens displayed shifting data streams. In the center of the room was a large glass cylinder, humming with a blue light. What is that? Sarah asked. That, a voice came from the shadows, is ether. A woman stepped out. She was Asian American, sharp-featured, wearing a lab coat over a punk rock t-shirt. She looked exhausted, but brilliant. Dr. Jin. Arthur nodded. This is Sarah Jensen. The heir, Dr. Jin said, looking Sarah up and down. You look like him, around the eyes. Who are you? Sarah asked. I'm Dr. Ami Jin, Chief Technology Officer, and the only other person in the world who knows what your father actually built. Dr. Jin walked to the glass cylinder. Everyone thinks Prometheus makes chips for phones, Dr. Jin said. And we do. That pays the bills. That gets us the 4 billion in revenue. But that's not the legacy. She tapped the glass. Your father cracked the code for room temperature superconductivity, Dr. Jin said quietly. Energy loss is 0. This chip, it can power a city for a year on a battery the size of a coin. It can process data faster than every server farm in Silicon Valley combined. Sarah stared at the blue light. Why? Why didn't he release it? Because it breaks the world, Sarah, Dr. Jin said. Oil companies? Bankrupt overnight. Traditional power grids? Obsolete. The economy would collapse before it rebuilt. He was waiting for the infrastructure to be ready. He was waiting for the right moment. And, Arthur added, his voice low, this is what the trillion-dollar figure comes from. The patents on this tech aren't worth billions. They are worth the entire energy sector of the planet. Does Richard know? Sarah asked. No, Dr. Jin said, but he suspects something. He saw some files he shouldn't have seen years ago. That's why he was so desperate to get into the inner circle at Stratton. He was hunting for this. If Richard gets a settlement, Arthur said, if he gets any foothold in this company, he won't just take the money. He'll sell this tech to the highest bidder. He'll sell it to foreign governments, to weapon manufacturers. He doesn't care about the future. He cares about the yacht he can buy today. Sarah looked at the blue light. She realized suddenly that this wasn't just a divorce drama anymore. It wasn't just about a cheating husband. It was about the future of the world. He can't have it, Sarah said. He's going to come for it, Dr. Jin warned. And he's not alone. I just got an alert. Richard has been seen entering the offices of Vanguard Capital. Arthur cursed under his breath. Vanguard? Sarah asked. Who are they? Corporate raiders, Arthur said. Specifically, a man named Sterling. My brother, Reginald. It seems Stratton Oakmont isn't just firing Richard. They're using him. Reginald is going to fund Richard's lawsuit. He's going to use Richard as a battering ram to force a hostile takeover of Prometheus. Sarah felt a cold shiver. Her own lawyer's brother was the enemy. Can we trust you, Arthur? Sarah asked, stepping back. Arthur looked at her, his face pained. Reginald and I haven't spoken in 20 years for this exact reason. He chases profit. I chase legacy. I promised your father I would protect you with my life, and I intend to keep that promise. Good, Sarah said. She walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights, lights that her father's invention could power forever. Because I have an idea, Sarah said. Richard wants a fight? He wants to play games? Fine. She turned back to them, her eyes hard. Let's play. The assault began at dawn, not with lawyers, but with headlines. Sarah woke up in the master suite of the Jensen estate to the sound of Arthur Sterling arguing in the hallway. She grabbed her robe silk, not the terry cloth she was used to, and stepped out. They can't do that, Arthur was shouting into his phone. It's libel. It's defamation per se. Arthur? Sarah asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. What's happening? Arthur lowered the phone, his face gray. He walked over to the large, flat-screen TV mounted on the wall and turned it on. Good Morning America was live. Richard Montgomery was sitting on the beige couch, looking like a broken man. He wore a simple sweater, no tie. His eyes were red-rimmed, likely the work of a makeup artist, but effective. Beside him sat a shark-like woman with a severe Bob Linda Vance, the most aggressive PR crisis manager in the country. I just feel used, Richard was saying to the host, his voice cracking perfectly. I supported Sarah for years. I paid her debts. I put her through night school, and all the while, she was sitting on a fortune, laughing at me. She knew I was struggling with the mortgage. She knew the stress was killing me, and she hid it. She waited until I broke, until I asked for a separation just to get some space, and then, bam, she finalized the divorce and locked me out. The host leaned in, sympathetic. So you're saying this was a setup? That she tricked you into divorcing her to protect her inheritance? It's the only explanation. Richard wiped a tear. I still love her. That's the tragic part. I'd take her back in a heartbeat. I don't care about the money. I just want my wife back. But she's changed. She's cold now. It's like the money ate her soul. Sarah stared at the screen, her mouth open. He broke up with me. He called me a peasant in open court. It doesn't matter, Arthur said, turning the TV off. Look at the ticker. Prometheus Dynamics stock is down 12% in pre-market trading. The narrative is that the company is now in the hands of a fraudulent, unstable heiresses who manipulated her husband. Investors are panicked. This is Reginald's doing, Sarah realized. Precisely, Arthur nodded. Reginald knows he can't win the legal battle for the trust, So he's destroying your reputation to force the board of directors to intervene. He wants to declare you unfit to lead Prometheus. I have a board? Sarah asked. You do. And 3 of the 7 members are old friends of Reginald's from the country club. They've called an emergency meeting for tomorrow at noon. Sarah felt the panic rising. Yesterday she was scrubbing tables. Today she was fighting a corporate coup. What do I do? We go on the offensive, Arthur said. But we need bait. We need to make Richard believe he's winning so he makes a mistake. What kind of mistake? The kind that sends him to federal prison, Arthur said darkly. I've set up a meeting, tonight. Neutral ground. The Oak Room at the Plaza Hotel. Just you and Richard. No lawyers. He won't come without Blackwood, Sarah said. He will if you tell him you're ready to settle. Arthur handed her a burner phone. Text him. Tell him the pressure is too much. Tell him you miss him. Play the part, Sarah. Play the girl he thinks you are. Weak, dependent, scared. Sarah took the phone. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. She didn't look weak anymore, but she could act. The Oak Room, 8 p.m. The restaurant was dimly lit, smelling of old money and expensive scotch. Richard was already there, sitting in a corner booth. He looked nervous, checking his watch every 30 seconds. When Sarah walked in, he stood up. She had dressed carefully, not in the power suits Arthur had bought her, but in a simple floral dress she had owned for years. She wore no jewelry. She kept her shoulders hunched, her eyes downcast. Sarah, Richard breathed, stepping forward to hug her. She let him. He smelled of the same sandalwood cologne, but underneath it, there was the sharp scent of fear. I saw the interview, Rick, she whispered, pulling away and sitting down. It was beautiful. I didn't know you still felt that way. Richard sat opposite her, grasping her hands across the table. Of course I do, baby. I was angry in court. You know how I get. My temper. It's my fatal flaw. But I never stopped loving you. I'm so tired, Rick, Sarah said, letting a tear fall. The cameras, the lawyers. Arthur is pushing me to fight, but I don't want to fight. I just want it to stop. Richard's eyes lit up. It can stop, Sarah. Tonight. We just need to fix this mistake. We can annul the divorce. We can say it was a misunderstanding. We get remarried, and all this goes away. We can run the company together, you and me. The power couple of the century. Remarry? Sarah hesitated. But what about Vanessa? Vanessa? Richard laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Vanessa is a distraction. She's nobody. You're my wife. But Arthur says if we remarry, the trust dissolves. Sarah lied. Dad's will says, I have to be single to inherit. Richard paused. He clearly hadn't read that clause because it didn't exist. Sarah was improvising. Oh, Richard said, his mind racing. Well, that's a problem. Okay, plan B. We don't remarry yet. You just bring me on as a consultant. Give me a seat on the board. And maybe a signing bonus? Just to show good faith? Say, 10 billion? Sarah looked down at her hands. 10 billion. That's a lot, Rick. It's nothing to you, Richard snapped, his mask slipping for a second. He quickly composed himself. I mean, it's a small price for peace, right? Think about it. I can handle the business side. I can handle Reginald Sterling. I know how these sharks think because I am one. You need me, Sarah. You're a waitress. You don't know how to run a trillion-dollar empire. You'll crash it in a week. You're right, Sarah whispered. I am just a waitress. She reached into her purse. Richard tensed, expecting a checkbook. Instead, she pulled out a small, silver flash drive. What is this? Richard asked. It's the encryption key, Sarah whispered, leaning in. For the Ether project. Dr. Jin gave it to me. She said, it's the only copy. If I give this to you, can you protect me? Can you make the reporters go away? Richard stared at the drive. Greed, pure and undistilled, flooded his face. He knew what Aether was. Reginald had told him. This drive was worth more than the money. It was the keys to the kingdom. Yes, Richard said, snatching the drive from her hand. Yes, Sarah. I can protect you. I'll take care of everything. You just go home and rest. Leave the heavy lifting to the men. He stood up, clutching the drive. I have to go. I have to secure this. Rick, wait, Sarah said. Don't you want to finish dinner? Not hungry, he said, already backing away. I'll call you tomorrow, baby. We're going to be so happy. He turned and practically ran out of the restaurant. Sarah watched him go. She picked up her glass of water and took a slow sip. Then, she pulled a small earpiece from her hair. Did you get that? She asked. Loud and clear, Arthur's voice came through, and the video feed is crystal clear. We have him on tape admitting he's only interested in the asset, soliciting a bribe, and accepting stolen corporate property. Is the drive real? Sarah asked. The drive, Dr. Jin's voice cut in, sounding amused, contains 4 gigabytes of encrypted malware. As soon as he plugs that into Reginald's server, it's going to infect their entire network. It will locate every illegal trade, every offshore account, and every dirty email they've sent in the last 10 years. Sarah smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd had in days. He thinks he won the lottery again. He just pulled the pin on a grenade, Arthur said. Get home, Sarah. Tomorrow is the board meeting. It's time to detonate it. The boardroom of Prometheus Dynamics was on the 89th floor, entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the city Richard Montgomery thought he was about to own. The 7 board members sat around a table made of reclaimed, petrified wood. 3 of them, Reginald's cronies, looked smug. The other 4 looked terrified. Sarah walked in at 11:59 a.m. She wore a white suit, sharp and tailored. Arthur Sterling walked 1 step behind her, carrying his battered briefcase. Miss Jensen, said the chairman, a man named Sterling Reginald, not Arthur. Reginald was a heavier, sweatier version of his brother. He didn't stand up. You're late. And frankly, your presence is a formality. We have a motion on the floor to remove you as CEO due to incompetence and moral turpitude. Moral turpitude? Sarah raised an eyebrow, taking the seat at the head of the table. That's a big word, Reginald. Did you learn it from the SEC indictments you've been dodging? Reginald turned purple. You insolent. I'm not here to argue, Sarah said, placing her hands on the table. I'm here to accept your resignations. The room went silent. Then, Reginald laughed. A wheezing, wet sound. Our resignations? My dear girl, you are out of your depth. We control the voting shares, and we have a new strategic partner coming in today. The doors opened. Richard Montgomery walked in. He was wearing a new suit. He looked triumphant. He walked straight to Reginald and shook his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, Reginald announced, I propose we appoint Mr. Richard Montgomery as interim CEO. He has the experience, and more importantly, he has secured the critical IP for the Ether project. Richard held up the silver flash drive Sarah had given him. He smirked at her. Sorry, Sarah. Business is business. You were right to give this to me. It's too dangerous for a civilian. Plug it in, Reginald commanded. Let's verify the assets. Richard walked to the main terminal at the end of the room. He inserted the drive. On the massive wall screen, a loading bar appeared. Loading either protocol. 10%, 50%, 99%. Gentlemen, Richard said, turning to face the room, arms spread wide. Welcome to the future. Access denied. System lockdown initiated. Internal security protocol. Dad joke activated. Richard froze. What? The screen turned bright red. A skull and crossbones appeared, but the skull was wearing a mechanic's cap. Then, a voice boomed through the speakers. It wasn't a computer voice. It was Jonathan Jensen's voice, recorded years ago. Hello, Richard. If you're hearing this, it means you did exactly what I knew you would do. You tried to take the shortcut. You tried to steal what you couldn't build. Richard frantically hit keys on the keyboard. Turn it off. It's a glitch. It's not a glitch, son, Jonathan's voice continued, calm and warm. It's a mirror. See, that drive doesn't contain Aether. Aether isn't code. Aether is hardware. That drive contains a worm. Specifically, a worm designed to scrape the network of whoever plugs it in and upload the data to the FBI, the SEC, and the IRS. Reginald Sterling stood up, knocking his chair over. Unplug it. You idiot, unplug it. Richard yanked the drive out, but the screen didn't change. Upload complete. Recipients: Federal Bureau of Investigation, NY District Attorney. Oh, and Richard? Jonathan's voice said. Sarah knows about the safe deposit box in the Cayman Islands, the one where you hid the kickbacks from the Stratton merger. I've forwarded the coordinates to the authorities. Good luck. The audio cut out. The silence in the room was absolute. Reginald looked at his phone. It was buzzing incessantly. My accounts. I'm locked out. The firm. The trading algorithms are frozen. He looked at Richard with pure hatred. What did you do? She gave it to me, Richard stammered, pointing at Sarah. She set me up. I gave you a choice, Rick, Sarah said, remaining seated. I asked you if you wanted to save our marriage or take the drive. You took the drive. You chose the money. You always choose the money. The double doors burst open, but it wasn't catering. 6 agents in windbreakers, marked FBI, entered the room. Richard Montgomery? The lead agent barked. Richard backed away, hitting the glass wall. No, this is a mistake. I'm the victim here. She's the fraud. We have a warrant for your arrest, the agent said, cuffing Richard's hands behind his back. Wire fraud, insider trading, and corporate espionage. And you, Mr. Reginald Sterling, will need you to come with us as well. Reginald didn't fight. He slumped into his chair, defeated. He looked at his brother, Arthur. You planned this, Reginald hissed. I simply executed the will, Arthur said smoothly. Jonathan's will was quite specific. He left his fortune to Sarah. He left his enemies to justice. As they dragged Richard out, he screamed. It wasn't a scream of anger anymore. It was the scream of a child who realizes the dark is real. Sarah, please. I'll sign anything. I'll sign the post-nup. Don't let them take me. Sarah didn't look away. She watched him until the elevator doors closed. She turned to the remaining board members. The 4 men who hadn't sided with Reginald were trembling. Gentlemen, Sarah said, standing up, I believe we have some vacancies to fill, and I have some ideas about the future of this company. Specifically, we're going to lower the price of our medical tech by 90%. We're going to give back. One of the board members cleared his throat. But, Miss Jensen, the profits. Sarah smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. I have $140 billion, she said. I think we can afford to be human. 3 months later, a biting wind whipped through Queens, but inside the community shelter, the air was warm. Sarah stood behind the serving line, ladling gravy, an apron covering her designer jeans. There were no cameras, no entourage, just the heiress to a $1 trillion empire doing the work her father had taught her to value. Arthur Sterling approached, holding a tray. You're heavy on the potatoes, boss. Sarah smiled, looking tired but radiant. How is he? Denied bail, Arthur reported quietly. And it gets better. Reginald turned state's evidence to save his own skin. He gave the feds everything, the insider trading, the offshore accounts. He pinned it all on Richard as the mastermind. Your ex-husband is looking at 20 years, minimum. Does he ask about me? Every day. He writes letters, offering to manage your portfolio from his cell. Sarah laughed a free, unburdened sound. He never changes. No, Arthur agreed. But you have. You just announced the 50% profit pledge. You're changing the world, Sarah. Miles away, in a cold 6x8 cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, Richard Montgomery stared at his Thanksgiving dinner, a dry bologna sandwich. On the flickering TV, mounted outside the bars, he saw Sarah's face. She wasn't just rich, she was beloved. She possessed the one thing he couldn't steal, sue for, or mock: true worth. He looked down at his tray. A guard had tossed a packet of generic cat food onto it as a cruel joke. Richard realized with crushing clarity that the verdict was finally in. Sarah was the queen, and he was finally, truly, poor. And that is the story of how Richard Montgomery fumbled the biggest bag in history. He thought he was discarding a poor wife, only to realize he was the one with nothing to offer but greed. Sarah proved that dignity is the ultimate currency, and that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting angry, it's getting everything. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? Would you have taken the $5 billion settlement, or would you have risked it all to take Richard down? And seriously, do you think Richard deserved 20 years? Or was losing the money punishment enough? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket in a place you will never guess. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you mock on the way up, because you might meet them on the way down. See you next time.